I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for January the 19th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the thought to express your mind alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So I've got lots of systems to talk about today. I'm going to leave a lot of timestamps in the description so you can skip ahead to any section that you want to listen to, as there's going to be a lot of discussion here. We're going to be talking about systems that could impact Rodrigues, Mauritius, and La Reunion again. We're going to talk about impacts to Australia and potentially New Caledonia. And there are systems in between that are, or at least probably just one system in between that's just in the middle of the ocean that we'll also touch on. So a lot of stuff to get into. Let's not waste any more time. What you're looking at on your screen right now is the remnants of Cyclone Belal. You can see it's south of the island of Rodrigues, which is right here. And here's the center of the low. Now, it's struggling quite a lot. As we talked about it would. The system has sat over here over the past couple of days, and the sea surface temperatures below it are just not warm enough anymore to sustain a tropical cyclone, and you can see the effects of that with the sun rising over just a naked circulation, no convection at all, and pretty soon this will not be a tropical cyclone anymore. I believe it's still a tropical depression by Mateo, France, but it will likely be post-tropical unless it manages to magically refire convection in the very cold sea temperatures. I would be surprised if that does so, but we've seen weirder things happen. Never say never with the weather. But either way, the system is south of Rodrigues, and the good news is the potential tracks that we talked about of the system coming back north or coming back west don't seem to be occurring here. Now, there's a bit of bad news here. The system, while this is going to track southwest away from these islands, it's embedded within a larger gyre of low pressure. Within that gyre, we have several lobes of low pressure, and I can show you that on the GFS model here. You can see we have this broad gyre from about Rodrigues, just east of Rodrigues, all the way back to Madagascar. And within this, we've got several lobes of low pressure. We've got one here, which this is Belal, and we've got this area of low pressure off the coastline of Madagascar. This is not forecast to become a tropical cyclone, by the way, if you are wondering. Has a very low chance of doing so. But this area of low pressure is also accompanying within this gyre. But we also have this little trough here, north of Rodrigues in Belal. Now, this trough is going to be important to watch over the next few days. As you can see, the spin of this gyre is clockwise around it. And what's going to happen is Belal is going to track southwest around the southern periphery of this gyre. This area of low pressure is going to come north and meet up with our little trough here. And this system might get entangled with it, might get absorbed. And then as this trough comes south, we then might see some tropical development take place. And by then, you could see some impacts in La Reunion, Mauritius, and Rodrigues. Now I'm going to show you the GFS run out from this point. You can see what I just talked about now laid out take place there. You can see the two areas of low pressure on the northern end of the low, or the gyre, sort of meet together, and then by early next week we start to get tropical development take place on the GFS model here, and by midweek we have a tropical cyclone there very close to Rodrigues. Now the GFS does spin this up pretty quickly, and this environment is forecast to be pretty favorable. You can see this is a GFS out to day 5, and this looks like a pretty low shear environment. There might be a little bit of shear there. You can see in the streamlines there is some northeasterly flow impinging upon the system, but generally this is a fairly low shear environment, and this is forecast to get more favorable after this point. But the problem that the system will have is it is more broad. That is good and bad news, both for the storm and for impacts. For the storm first, the more broad a system is, it can be more formidable against wind shear. It can hold up better against impacts like wind shear. But the bad news for tropical cyclones is it takes a little bit longer for broad systems to get developed into tropical cyclones, and it takes them a while to intensify. So that's why I'm a bit weary on the GFS intensifying the system pretty quickly and wrapping it up as quickly as you just saw it do on the model. Now for impacts, a broad system, as the name implies, has a lot more broad impacts. And that's bad news, because even if the system doesn't come your way directly, you could still get a lot of significant impacts, just given the broad nature of the storm. I'm going to show you a couple more plots before we go into some of the impacts. This is a European model from earlier today. You can see the system develop here on the European, and we do eventually get a tropical depression, it looks like, on the run. But you can see it takes much longer on the European to actually get to that stage. You can see it actually doesn't really get there until it passes Mauritius and Rodrigues on this run. This would be a scenario that I'd say is more likely here, given the broad nature of the storm that the models are depicting right here. I wouldn't anticipate rapid intensification here, just given how broad the system is. If that does become more of a possibility, we'll talk about it when that does. But right now, I don't see an imminent, very strong cyclone from this. It could absolutely intensify some if it does get its structure well developed. We could absolutely get a cyclone out of this. But in terms of rapidly intensifying to a big, powerful cyclone, I'm a bit hesitant on that just right now. Now I'm going to go to the 10-meter wind plot from the GFS. And you can see just the broad nature of the storm as I go through time. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can see it a little bit more. You can see the storm center is here, and it's around Rodrigues. But keep in mind that this broad area of winds is extending pretty far from the center. If I get some measurements here, on the eastern and northeastern side, it's about 200 to 250 nautical miles. That's about let's see, looks like on all quadrants here from the eastern and northern, it's over 500 kilometers away from the center in the northeastern side. And on the western side, we still got a significant wind field of, extending away 300 kilometers from the west. And it's important to not pay very much attention to the exact track that GFS has here. I know this run shows it going right over Rodrigues, but keep in mind the European also had it going right over Mauritius on its run. So there's a lot of track uncertainty here. And that just has to do exactly with where does an area of low pressure develop along the northern end of that gyre. That goes back to that. So the main thing to do here for those in La Reunion, Mauritius, and Rodrigues is just pay attention to it and pay attention to Mateo, France, as they're going to keep having updates on the potential development of the system. Right now, they've got moderate chances out for tropical development. You can see here the moderate zone here with a very broad development area. And if this does develop, say on the eastern end of this, could we get it to come east of Rodrigues? That's a possibility. Does it form more in the center here and come closer to Rodrigues? That's a possibility there. Does it come a little bit further west on development, and could we still get impacts in La Reunion and Mauritius? That is absolutely still a possibility. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and that uncertainty really won't be answered until we get a fine area of low pressure developed along that trough. But impacts here are mainly looking to include heavy rainfall and some gusty winds, and exact details on that will be have to figure it out as the system does develop. But I'll leave a link to Mateo, France, like I always do, at the top of the description, so you can skip ahead or to that website and skip ahead to this page, and you can view their tropical weather outlooks and see any advisories they may have on a system when they do develop. But we're going to move east. You can already see this next system we're going to be talking about is Tropical Cyclone Anggrek. Again, I hope I'm saying that name correctly. But you can see on the broad view here from Australia west, here's our storm, and it is fortunately staying well west of Cocos Island, and the cyclone watch has been dropped there. Now, the system is not going to be really going anywhere in a hurry. Same story as my last video. It's not really going to be going anywhere in a hurry over the next few days. And we're really not going to be touching on this all too much, as there's a ton of uncertainty on this storm, what exactly may happen in the long term. The short version of this storm is it's a weak storm right now being sheared. There's a lot of westerly winds holding back the storm right now. And the system is going to be tracking slowly towards the west over the coming days. Now, shear may subside during the latter half of that forecast, and we might see a little bit of intensification after that, but there's a lot of uncertainty with how this storm is positioned, how its structure is, and how our system in the southwest Indian Ocean develops. I'm going to go into more detail on that right about now. And here's a closer infrared loop. You can tell that the system is being sheared by the pretty sharp cutoff of convection on the eastern end. You can sort of see it goes from very cold cloud tops to nothing in a fairly short distance. And that's some of the easterly shear that we're seeing impact the system. You can see that here aloft, you can see this upper level cirrus on the eastern side is not getting past, say, about this point. It's very restricted. We've got a lot of convection over Indonesia, and this is putting a lot of easterly flow towards the system, and this is shearing it. Now, the system has tried to fend off the shear, and we've seen attempts at the system trying to wrap up a little bit better. You can see that here in a microwave pass that we got earlier today, with this convection wrapping around and maybe trying to close off a tiny eye there. Not sure if that's really still the case anymore. I'm not really seeing a lot of significant development on satellite, so I wouldn't anticipate that that core is really stable right now. We'll see what the next microwave pass does say. But as of right now, the system is struggling. Now, as I said, the system is staying well west of Cocos Island. You can see the island there, the little black dot east of the island, and this will continue to push away from it. And this easterly shear is pretty good help to you all, as the convection is being primarily kept away from the island. So thank the shear for that. Now, the system, like I mentioned, may have a chance to intensify as we get towards the latter half of the forecast, getting towards 7 days. You can see the system has slowly tracked west over the past, 4, 5, 6 days on this run. And now as we get towards day 7, here's a storm on the model. We've got a fairly low shear environment. Now, on paper, this does look like a fairly favorable environment for the system to finally start to intensify. But there's a lot of uncertainty here. This is over 6 days out on this frame. There's a lot of uncertainty on exactly what may happen here. And I'm going to go over some of those scenarios just now. There's uncertainty on exactly where the storm is going to be by this point. You can see that in the track forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology. There's just by the end of the forecast, storm could be anywhere in this region. And there might be even a larger area of uncertainty than this by the time that I'm showing you on this run. So that's one factor. Another factor is, how is the storm after the shear? Is it too well developed? Is it still very disrupted? That may delay some intensification time, as the system would need to rebuild itself. The other uncertainty comes in to our Southwest Indian Ocean system near Rodrigues. How does that system develop? Where exactly is it positioned? How strong is it? Because you can see all of this flow expanding away from the storm, and if this storm runs into this, if Anggrek runs into that flow, that is going to be a very significant shear, because keep in mind, the storm's tracking like this, and this shear is crossing it like this, and that's at a pretty significant speed there too. That's 50 or 60 knots of flow cutting across our storm. That would absolutely destroy any tropical cyclone that is active at that time. You can see there's just too much uncertainty to give any specific details on a long-term track of Anggrek. What can be said is the system is not likely to really impact any land areas over the next 7 days. You can see after it passes west of Cocos Island, the system is just going to be in the middle of the ocean. And exactly what happens here, does it come maybe later down the road towards some of the islands further west? We'll talk about that when we get there. But for now, in this run, at least in the next 7 days, it's staying out to sea, and that's the good news here. We can deal with a lot of this uncertainty without worrying about potential land impacts as we go. So we'll keep an eye on this system as it does progress, but it looks like Anggrek could be here for a while, so get used to that name. We're now going to move further east. We're going to move to over Australia. This is Invest 99S, which looks like a tropical cyclone to me. You can see a very well-developed area of low pressure underneath what appears to be pretty well-organized convection. One of the classic examples of the brown ocean effect taking shape. Australia is well known for having a good brown ocean effect for tropical cyclones. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically to where you can get tropical development or even intensification in some cases. We've seen cyclones come ashore and even intensify over land across a warm region like Australia here. And this has good moisture supply, unlike you might think just being over land, you can see this broad area of low pressure is allowing all of this moisture from the Gulf of Carpentaria and the Indian Ocean to be drawn right into the system. So this is a primed environment for a brown ocean effect. Now, something about this is the storm could form, but intensification does not happen very quickly at all with these types of storms. Usually you see the system get to an intensity and it sort of just stays there, and it really doesn't change much at all. Really what tends to happen is the system eventually just weakens if as long as other environmental conditions start to get a little bit less favorable. And we might start to see a little bit of unfavorability for the system right now. You can see we do have some streaming easterly winds over Queensland here. And if you look where the exact area of low pressure is, it looks like it's about here, and all the convection is on the western side of this, suggesting that this easterly flow is impinging upon the storm, and we're starting to get a little bit of disruption from that. Now, over the coming days, this system is going to continue to sit here, and unfortunately, for areas that have gotten a lot of rainfall here, the rainfall is going to continue. Now, eventually, we're going to get an area of high pressure to form down south, and we will finally be able to remove this system from northern Australia. I think the system has been here for about a week now, maybe two, as it's just been sitting here. Now, this is a GFS 850 millibar vorticity plot. You can see at the initialization where the system is sitting over northern Australia. Now, what we have on the models, we have an area of high pressure developing down to the south, and this will start carrying the system towards the west. And this will carry it through portions of the Northern Territories and Western Australia. And there's the potential later down the line for this system to come offshore, and we'll have to just keep an eye on it. It is very broad here, but we'll just have to keep an eye on it, see if maybe we could get some tropical development out of that. Now, the good news is you can sort of see a ridge nosing in here on the western side of this plot. This is going to carry the system further out to sea, so we're not going to have this system come out to sea, stall again, and then come back to where it just was. We're finally looking to get rid of this system out of Australia, as we've probably been wanting for the past week. And you can see that depicted well here on the European ensemble with the center position here and all the tracks carrying it towards Western Australia, with some potential, once again, for it to come offshore, but significant development is not anticipated at this time. All right. After all that, we're going to be moving to our final system, and this is a bit of a long system. We've got a lot to talk about with this one. We got 90p, Invest 90p here, east of Queensland and Australia. You can see it there with all the convection blowing up south of the Papua New Guinea Islands. And over the coming days, the environment is forecast to get much more favorable, even more so than it is now, and development is likely as the system does track towards the south. Now here's the zoomed in true color imagery, and you can see as the sun rises over the region, we have a lot of convection bubbling around an area of low pressure that is centered right about here on the southern periphery of it. Now the system right now is facing some shear. You can sort of see that. You can see some of the upper level cirrus clouds here over New Caledonia moving towards the west. This is on the eastern periphery of an upper level ridge that you can see better here on the water vapor loop with this flow sort of like this. So the ridge is centered over here, and on the eastern end, you've got all this southerly flow pushing into the system. And you can see the impacts of that on the Zascat Pass that we got not too long ago. You can see the area of low pressure is about here, and all of the convection and strong winds are kept to the northern and western sides of that low. Now, in terms of how developed this low is, it is developing, but it's certainly not a tropical cyclone yet. You can see we have, looks like maybe a main area of low pressure here, but it sort of has a trough axis onto the western end. So I sort of have this broad area of low pressure here. Now, eventually, that ridge is going to weaken and that southerly flow should subside. And once that happens, we should start to see more of this convection start organizing, wrapping around to the southern side of the storm. And by then, we'll get a more compact area of low pressure, and then tropical development will take place. This is a 200 millibar flow plot on the GFS. You can see at the initialization, there's the ridge aloft with that southerly flow being brought to the system. But as you can see over the coming days, it does weaken. And as we get towards day 3 and day 4, we have much more of a divergent flow ahead of a weak upper trough here over eastern Australia. And you can see a lot of this flow is expanding away from the storm, which is indicative of a low shear, favorable environment for these storms. Now, the GFS, similarly to our Southwest Indian Ocean system, does ramp this up very quickly. You can see just the rapid pressure falls on the red L there. The storm intensifies very quickly on the GFS. This one I can see a little bit more of the potential for, just given how favorable the environment is looking to be, and the system is not looking to be as broad. But I do think right now, the GFS might be still intensifying it a little bit too quick. Now, the European, on the other hand, I think is doing it a little bit too slowly, and it's a bit too weak. The European does have a bias to do stuff like this, and you can see it has a very weak storm here on its run, sitting east of Queensland. Now, we know the environment is favorable, so intensification of some sort seems to be likely after development. But the main question here is going to be track, and there's a lot of variability here onto what exactly happens with the storm, just given its intensity. And that's why this will be a bit of a subtle case of, is the European showing it too weak? Could it be showing the wrong track because of that, or is it a legitimate possibility? Now, I'm going to show you the GFS ensemble plot. First, I'm going to show you the 850 millibar height plot. And you can see the storm position on the GFS ensemble. So you can see the broad area of low pressure already on there. Now, we have a few key features in place. We have a ridge over Australia. This is trying to push the system into Queensland, Australia. Now, we also have a trough down here by New Zealand. And aloft, this is a little bit stronger on these runs. You can see that on 850 millibar plot, it was more kept down here while this ridge extended further east. But aloft, we've got the trough extending further north, eroding part of this ridge, or at least holding it back in eastern Australia, which allows the system to come more southeast. And you can sort of see here already why the intensity is important here. If you do have a weaker system, in this case, the system is going to be more likely to track in the 850 millibar flow, following this bridge into Australia. That's why I talked about with the European, you got to pay attention. Is it being a little bit too weak, or is it a legitimate possibility here that it could happen? And if you look at the 500 millibar plot, if the storm is stronger, it's going to feel more of this flow up in this part of the troposphere. So it's going to likely feel this trough and start to come towards the southeast. Now, naturally, this will cause a little bit of shear, and that could potentially weaken the system a little bit. And that's a possibility, but the system will likely already be strong by the time this trough starts to dig in. You can see this is by 5 days, so it's had up until now to intensify. So the question is, how strong has it gotten by this point? Is it a strong storm that's going to be caught by this trough, or is it a weak storm that's just going to get caught by the ridge and go towards Australia? And that's really what models are struggling with right now. If I had to give my thoughts on this overall pattern, I think some intensification is certainly looking likely here with the system. I wouldn't be all too surprised to see some form of quick to rapid intensification once the system forms. I wouldn't be surprised to see, not too much intensification at all. You can see the GFS ensemble sort of split into two. We've got this branch here on the eastern end of this being maybe a little bit stronger. I guess we've got more of this blob here that's a little bit stronger too. But all of this is going to try and track southeast. But we do have some members on the western end that are trying to go into Australia on their select runs. Now, there's also a bit of uncertainty on exactly, how far west or east it tracks. That is a lot of just normal uncertainty that you have across the next 5 days of forecast time. And exactly where that is, that could change some impacts for New Caledonia and Queensland. But main point I'm trying to drive home here is I think some intensification appears likely here, and I don't think a track just straight into Queensland is likely here, at least right now. Now, this is 5 days out. Things are subject to change, But that's my thoughts right now. I don't think we're likely to get a track right into eastern Australia. I think the more likely scenario is we get the storm to track south and then dive southeast. The key thing will be, where exactly is it? Is it west, closer to Australia, and could that potentially bring some impacts along the coastline as it makes this track towards the southeast? Or is it a bit further east, and could we get it to bring impacts to New Caledonia as it makes that bend towards the southeast? There's a lot of uncertainty here, and we'll just have to figure that out with time. This is just some natural uncertainty that exists with a timing here. This is 5+ days out, so there's a lot of time to prepare, but there's also a lot of time to watch it. You can see here on the Bureau of Meteorology forecast, as I go up to this, you can see the uncertainty there on their map, with the uncertainties extending over a pretty far distance. So those along the coastline of New Caledonia and in Australia, just make sure you stay tuned to the Bureau of Meteorology over the next few days as they do continue to update you. In New Caledonia, the Fiji Meteorological Service, as I believe that's where their area of responsibility is. But I'll also have future videos throughout the rest of this week, into this weekend, or through the weekend into early next week, on all of the systems mentioned here. And I'll leave, once again, links to Bureau of Meteorology and the Fiji Meteorological Service at the top of the description, so you can click those links and go right to these pages that I've shown you today. But that's all for now. Once again, stay safe in all the areas that may be impacted by tropical cyclones over the next few days. I'll leave you all with the image of what was Belal. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.